This is Beyond the Big Screen podcast with your host, Steve Guerra. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Big Screen podcast, where we talk about great movies and stories so great they should be movies. Links to learn more about our guest today can be found in the show notes. You can support Beyond the Big Screen on Patreon.com. By joining on Patreon, you help keep Beyond the Big Screen sustainable and get many great benefits. Go to patreon.com/Beyond the Big Screen to learn more and sign up. Find show notes, links to subscribe, and leave Apple Podcast reviews by going to our website, beyondthebigscreen.com. And now, let's go Beyond the Big Screen.
Welcome back to Beyond the Big Screen. This is a very special episode because everybody knows why. Eric and I, we have a need for speed again with Top Gun Maverick. We are in the right place at the right time to talk about Top Gun Maverick. And I think the best place, let's just do it. Eric, what was your headspace with this movie? It's fairly much just released, and it's been 30 plus years since the original came out. What did you think before you even sat down in the movie theater? What did you think? What were you coming in with your expectations?
Well, I'm Steve. I'm an eternal optimist. I always believe that, that greatness is possible. And I was so scared too, because it's just sequels are very, very hard, and sequels with a lot of time and a lot of like cultishness around them are very hard. I mean, like, as much as I hate to say it, maybe we'll do something about this. I think every single Star Wars movie after the first three got worse and worse. Like, you start going like after 4, 5, 6, like 1, 2, 3, they got worse and worse and worse. And then 7, 8, 9 got worse and worse and worse. Rogue One is like a delightful outlier here because they were like doing their own thing, but they just got worse. And it was because there's like all this like mumbo jumbo about like, oh, we have to like do these throwbacks, and you're like, oh, look, it's C-3PO, and like all the Ewoks are back and all that stuff. And so you have to do all these like throwbacks, but it can't be too much of a throwback. And so like, okay, so we got to get Maverick in there, and like we got to, and so there's all going to be all these like allusions to the first movie, but it can't be the same movie. And it's just, and so basically like this is the impossible movie to make. This is the white whale, right? This is Moby Dick stuff. And so of course I'm nervous because, when you make a new movie, or at least a movie that's like allowed to be radically different, right? Like Mad Max Fury Road is a sequel in some way, but it's allowed to be its own movie, right? Like what's the same about it versus like the Road Warrior? Some weirdo named Max is in it, right? And like and everyone talks funny and dresses funny. Like that's the part that's the same. But this isn't allowed to be just its own thing. It's got so much in the way of expectations, right? There's so many constraints about it. There's people are going to, like it's one of those things where like whichever way you go, people are going to gripe. And so I can't imagine trying to make this movie. And so I went into it with this like apprehension of like of what are the decisions that are going to be made. There's a lot of money on the line. There's a lot of expectations by the financiers about like how to make the most money and essentially how to like do the pandering type stuff that like Marvel does that makes their movies kind of like, whitewashed garbage. And you can see I'm in a bit of a mood. So anyway, I just so much apprehension about like, is this just going to be kind of a crappy blockbuster? And it's probably the way I've set it up gives it away that I don't think it was a crappy blockbuster. But boy, was I worried it would be.
Yeah, I was in the exact same spot as that. The first one was so critical to my life. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy to say, but Top Gun is a major part of my life, and to come back with it almost 35 years later, in such a different time frame. I mean, I don't know how anybody couldn't have been nervous sitting down to watch it. unless you weren't born into it, I guess, unless
Right.
it wasn't unless Top Gun wasn't your birthright, then I could see like you could sit down and watch it and have no expectations coming into it. But I would say if you're anything of a certain age, you were coming into this, I think, probably, and no other movie besides maybe Star Wars would have had so many expectations built into it. You're absolutely right there.
And I actually think you make such a great point about it's not just that this was like this movie. Yeah, it's not just that this is a great film. There's actually more to it than Star Wars, way more. And it's because Star Wars is complete whole cloth space fantasy, whereas this is super political, right? Top Gun is super political. Like, remember there was like, even leading up to it, there was this controversy where we thought for a while that they were going to take the Taiwanese flag off of Maverick's jacket, and maybe they did for like the Chinese release or something. But like, Maverick always had a Taiwanese flag on his jacket, Republic of China, and there was this like rumor they were going to take it off to pander to the Chinese, and I was like so angry about it. And and when Top Gun came out, and that's, I think, actually the other part of this that you and I are so cognizant of, that our our middle-aged and older audience really understand, or younger audience, like, they're can never fully understand, is that this movie came out at, like, in some ways, part of the peak of the United States's sense of its like righteousness, its belief that the future for it is bright, that we can fix everything, that there are good guys and bad guys, and we are the good guys, right? Even when we're like, even when, there's the 80s had a lot of like, the bad boys that don't follow the rules, but like deep down they have a heart of gold and they do the right thing in the end, kind of Dirty Harry like. Dirty Harry is an extreme example, but and Top Gun represented this like America that was very proud of itself and bold, and was like, heck yeah, we're going to shoot people, shoot down other planes over the Indian Ocean. I mean, they shot first, but like, we're going to shoot them back. Heck yeah. Right. And even when they didn't shoot, like, we're going to fly upside down over them and it might cause an international incident, but we're the United States. Like, you came way too close to our aircraft carrier. And there's this like great pride there. And we are in this like super postmodern, post-Iraq, post-Afghanistan withdrawal, post-Trump, post-truth, fall of the American empire, age of great shame and internal strife. And so we're also, there's also this, like, how do you possibly create a Top Gun movie that also doesn't seem like this kind of just like stupid jingoistic, on the one hand, like stupid jingoistic, like just pandering to like old nostalgia and just like be out of touch with the times. And how do you also not make it into, essentially, I hate to use this word, but like, how do you not make it into something that Fox is going to run around and call woke, right? That is like, oh, actually America's like bad and everything's, or like everything's morally gray and weird, and there are no good guys and bad guys, and we can't have that. And so how do you thread that needle? And like, holy smokes, it threaded the needle. And we're going to have to talk about how, because I think I'm going to have to figure it out as we talk about it here. But like, so the pressure was even higher because it's so political. This movie is about, Top Gun was about who America is deep down, and Top Gun Maverick still is. And it addresses it with like compassion and courage in a way that I think is awesome. So yeah, I'm very excited to talk about this movie with you.
Yeah, you're so right. We were in 1987, 1988. The United States was at really the top of the wave of, we were in the driver's seat. The perception was the United States was a force of good. Now in the 2020s, a lot of people aren't thinking that. And you look at movies. I had just watched a movie about Afghanistan called the Kill Team, and we see that maybe all this what we've done in the last 20 years, maybe the U.S. wasn't a force of good, but we don't see that. We see the fairy tale of what we really want to be and what America really could be with the first Top Gun. That we don't. That was my concern, and that was going into the movie, is like, how can you bring back that loving feeling, so to speak,
that we lost? Yeah, but you can't do it the same way, right? Because if you did it the same way, it would just be so hollow and trite, right? It'd be like if you show up to some like crappy Disneyland version of the Wild West, where people are like, howdy, partner, you want a pan for gold? When you paid $75 a ticket to be there, and you're there in a t-shirt, right? It would just feel wrong, because you're like, that's not what this is anymore. And so how do you possibly navigate that? This is like, Dune aside, people say Dune's the impossible movie. No, man. Top Gun, the sequel to Top Gun, what the cojones on the people who said, yeah, man, we're going to do this and it's going to be great. Unbelievable courage to even give it a shot. And it just, the more I think about it, the more, and I hope, y'all listening really appreciate just how fraught this thing is. Everything, I hate to say it, but like everything's fraught now. Like the simplest stuff gets politicized. Like M&Ms are now politicized, right? But a movie about like celebrating the military in the United States, but like not too much, right? Like that's be very, very fraught. And it didn't catch fire and burn down. So yeah, let's talk about how.
You know what? The other thing I think is worth mentioning, and we talked about it a lot in the last episode with on the original Top Gun, was that it was such a well-crafted story. I think that gets lost so much in the discussion, is that it had every element of a well-crafted drama. It had the character arc. It had where Maverick was not necessarily the hero, and we discussed that. And I think that was another thing. And I'd like to definitely talk about that, is the story. I think that the original Top Gun was such a perfect hero's journey.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, this isn't someone who, we see a lot of like hero's journeys where someone is, they just like haven't found the courage yet, or they haven't found the chutzpah, they haven't found their magical power, but their heart's in the right place. And their like dying grandfather told them, like, here's the sword, go do the thing. And they just have to persevere. And that is not Maverick. Maverick needs a attitude adjustment big time. Right. And even at the end, he's still suffering from PTSD, right? We wouldn't have called it that 35 years ago, but he's suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder right at the end. And he has to get over himself in this really big way. And he's so busy, and he's so busy chasing tail and trying to like pick fights with rivals and make trouble and be a bad boy, that he, people get hurt because of him. And he's told that by the real hero, Iceman, right? Who's like, he's just like Iceman's just the Terminator, right? He's just showing up, doing his job. He's the best pilot out there, or actually Maverick's the best pilot out there when he's fully present. But because Iceman is consistent, he's the best pilot out there. And, Maverick saves at the end. And you go, great work, Maverick, but can you be Mr. Consistency? And so there's this, what I love about going into Top Gun Maverick is there is still a lot of room for this guy to grow, a ton of room for this guy to grow. And we get to see some of that in this film.
That's probably the place to really jump in, because it is a character-driven movie. It's the character of Pete Maverick. Let's jump into it. What was the growth that we saw in him just from that inner movie period between Top Gun and then Maverick? They kind of present us with a new Pete Maverick. What was his last name? I'm totally blanking.
Mitchell.
Mitchell. Yeah. Pete Maverick Mitchell.
Yeah, Captain Pete Maverick Mitchell. What's interesting is you can tell this is a guy who's been beat down. He's run up against the system so many times, and he has lost so many times that he has been humbled. And you can actually see a lot of coping mechanisms for him. You see them somewhat later in the movie when he's like asking permission of I forget, like Dan Ham's character, the leading admiral. When he's like asking permission to actually like fly on the mission, you see he's like almost servile, and he's like this way he would never have been in the past. But he's still a rule breaker. So he's got these coping mechanisms, and his behavior is at times inconsistent, because he's like learned to be careful of like touching hot stoves. And you see that, and I love those flaws in him. Like, they're not the kind of obvious, just like bad boy flaws anymore. They're the flaws of someone who's lived a life of a lot of turmoil and a lot of conflict, and who's kind of in a lot of ways a low point in his life, and he's still searching for purpose and meaning. He feels like it's all behind him, right? He risks being like the alcoholic Buzz Aldrin in some ways. At the beginning, he's being told that the day of the fighter jockey is almost over. He says, "Maybe so, sir, but not today." And so I think what you see in him, you see a humbled person, and I think we often see that as as not necessarily a good thing. But I think his humility is very powerful. One of the things that we see throughout this movie is this is a man who's finally putting others before him. He puts the mission before him. He puts his students before him. He puts the lives of others before him always. And that's something that he clearly learned from Iceman, the real hero of the first movie. And that's explained. But in his time as a pilot and in his time as an instructor between movies, you see that change, and you also see him change from just being a tail chaser to someone who starts to care about the people around him and the women around him. But he's someone who's been so rightly burned. His reputation's been burned by his own irresponsible and self-centered behavior that people, women included, and especially, have trouble trusting him. So he's someone who's very lonely, right? You see him at the bar, and he gets thrown out for not being able to, he's like not part of the system, and he's not part of the gang anymore. He doesn't even know how the customs at the fighter pilot bar work, right? He's an outsider in his own game. Like, it's not like he ever left, right? It's not like he's like became like a professor at Colorado Springs or something. Sorry, not Colorado Springs. It would be the Air Force Naval Academy. Annapolis. But he's an outsider, and he's alone. And so you I think very early on you feel sorry for the guy, but in this very human way, and in this way where like he's not a victim. These are the consequences of his actions as a younger man that caught up to him, and he's learned some lessons, and he owns it, right? He doesn't see himself as a victim either. He's someone who's like settled into the life that he sort of brought upon himself, as it were. That's kind of who I think we're dealing with.
You see with Maverick too, that he knows Iceman's an admiral. His peers have just blew by him by leaps and bounds. I mean, most of his peers are probably working for the defense industry or whatever. And even the admiral played by John Hamm is probably a generation younger than him and has already leapfrogged him in career.
Totally. Yeah, and it's actually it's a great reminder that we have to remember that when we're seeing this movie, like Tom Cruise himself is the like absolute psychopath of like fitness and like engagement, and who knows what he's pumping himself full of. I don't know, but he looks like a much younger man than he is. He's in his 60s, I believe, and it is also the case that I believe Pete Mitchell is supposed to be in his late 50s or something like that. Like he's supposed to be pretty old. And so, yeah, his seniors, like he is subordinate to people much younger than him now. And even though sometimes it doesn't look it. So yeah, it's a great point.
Isn't it amazing, just to step aside for a second? Tom Cruise looks better now than he did in 1987.
I didn't know if I was going to be the guy to say it or you were going to be the guy to say it, but like, holy smokes, is he handsome? Yeah. He is, he aged exceptionally well. And, although there's like that, I don't know, there's that one movie where he looked kind of like a lesbian woman for a bit, but yes, like in Top Gun Maverick, he's possibly the most handsome guy on the planet. And I agree, even more, I dare say significantly more handsome than in OG Top Gun. And I don't know what it is. And, I'm not an expert on these things, but I do admire the guy's, commitment. I mean, let's take a moment to talk about Tom Cruise for a minute here. This is a guy who is so committed to doing his own stunts that like in Mission Impossible, he said, "Oh no, you are going to strap me to a C-130. I will be strapped to the C-130 by a steel cable, and I will hold on to the C-130 as it takes off. Thank you." And for another Mission Impossible, he said, "Oh no, I will be on the motorcycle and I will take the motorcycle off the cliff and I will deploy a parachute. And by the way, we're going to do it 8 times until we get it right." And in Top Gun Maverick, he said, "Look, last time when we did the OG Top Gun, it wasn't real enough for me. And now I'm the man. So I get to decide how we're going to do it. And here's how we're going to do it. What we're going to do." And he's like, "The only way I'll do this, Jerry Bruckheimer, is if all of the scenes where actors are in a plane, and that plane is actually flying in the air. None of this on the ground, tilting around with a background stuff. Everyone's in the air in a plane." Now, of course, the actors are not flying the plane, but they are in the air in the plane. So Tom Cruise, who is an amateur stunt pilot, who owns his own stunt jet plane because he's fantabulously rich, of course. He not his money, but he gets a bunch of Navy pilots to help him out, but he leads the other actors through the training program of becoming ready to one, look like they know what they're doing in these planes, but 2, and more importantly, be able to deal with being in them, right? When you see these guys flying around and like their faces look like they're melting off from the G-forces, that's because their faces are melting off from the G-forces, because they're actually flying around in trainer F-18s. And I say trainer F-18s, the only reason the word trainer is applicable here is because the trainer has 2 cockpits, which means that one of them is being flown by the Navy pilot and one of them has the actor in it with a bunch of IMAX cameras. And so there's nothing gentle about a trainer F-18. It's just an F-18. And so these guys are like, they're melting. And during training, these actors, they're puking, they're fainting, because learning to handle G's takes a lot of work. And so they worked on it for like 6 months or something, maybe more. That's how committed this guy is. This is his labor of love. This is his magnum opus. He showed up. And, there's stuff about Tom Cruise, this whole Scientology thing that I don't love. But as an actor, he's also like apparently just like this wonderfully nice guy, and he cares about everybody and all this stuff. And holy smokes, as an actor, if you love cinema and you don't respect Tom Cruise, it's because you don't know Tom Cruise.
Yeah, it's important to point that out, that this movie was really pushed by him wanting to push the envelope of filmmaking.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Maybe talk about what you felt about his relationships with the other pilots. He's again, with the first movie and then this movie, it's been inverted. He's not the student, he's the trainer now at Top Gun. Well, not even really technically Top Gun, which is another issue I guess we could get into.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like that they broke out of it just being Top Gun, right? So like, because Top Gun's just the academy. So it's this idea, it's this safe space, right? So it was a playground for these guys. They're all guys in the OG movie to go chase tail and like be macho at each other. And, and for him to goof around and buzz the tower and stuff like that. And, we got to have what's his face run around and be like, I've had it, I want some butts, right? And you get these funny moments. And it's like, oh no, this is the big leagues. This is the real stuff. Why are we having this class? Because we have this like slightly convoluted scenario, right? It's only slightly convoluted. I actually, some people are like, it's not realistic. It's like, shut up. Like, just come on. Right. Like, of course it's not perfectly realistic. But it's not bad. It's really not bad as far as scenarios go. And so you have the scenario that requires, these kids to get, these young kids who are like, they're the best of the best. They came out, they're the top grads from Top Gun, to then go to the next level and like start doing the impossible with these F-18s. And they just take, they're like, okay, they need to be trained by this guy who can push the envelope because of the scenario, right? Because they have to like, it's because like this uranium storage facility or enrichment facility is at like the bottom of this volcano, this dormant volcano. And so you have to be able to like, just do it's like surrounded by SAMs and surrounded by radar, and you have to just be able to do crazy stuff with it. So they're like, who's like the maniac who knows how to push these things as hard as possible? Well, we have Pete Mitchell, who is established at the beginning of this as the first person to push a fighter or a jet to Mach 10 and almost dies. And we have one of the great opening scenes of the movie where, oh my gosh, what's his name? That great angry bald actor.
Ed Harris.
Ed Harris. Yeah. He actually in the movie, in the filming, he's actually standing there as a jet plane takes off, and it is actually Ed Harris eating jet wash as he stands there, and an actual building's roof gets actually blown off in reality as Ed Harris is actually standing there. It's incredible. And that was not planned. And Ed Harris is so cool that he's like, I'm just going to stand here and not ruin this shot because he's the man. And and then Maverick hits Mach 10, the plane blows up. And then people are like, oh, it's not realistic. Who is it? Neil deGrasse Tyson's like, he wouldn't have survived. Who cares? He lands in like Iowa or something, and he takes a sip of water. And someone welcomes him to Earth, and you get this chuckle. And that's actually one of like the first moments, I think, where you start to go like, oh, this movie's going to be a little bit different. I was not expecting the chuckle, right? I wasn't expecting to laugh like that. These like really lighthearted moments like that. And I really liked it. So anyway, you have to get the maniac who, you otherwise wouldn't let near these kids. But it's because you've got this convoluted situation where you have to push, where you can't do the safe thing that the Americans like to do, which is just overwhelming firepower, massive technological advantage, be as far away from the enemy as possible because we really don't like casualties. And actually what I really like about the parallel is that the reason Top Gun came about in the first place was because that doctrine of just be really far away and shoot missiles from a long distance got a lot of people killed in Vietnam, which is why, if you look at the text at the beginning of Top Gun, that's why Top Gun happened. They're like, no, you actually have to be able to dogfight. And this is like that, but the next level entirely. And I thought that was very cool.
Steve here again. We are a member of the Parthenon Podcast Network, featuring great shows like Josh Cohen's Eyewitness History and many other great shows. Go to Parthenon Podcast to learn more. And now, here is a quick word from our sponsors. You know what I would have loved to have seen in the movie, and I think it would have tied the first movie to the second movie, but still stood alone well, is if they had pitted the Top Gun people, the pilots, what we talked about in the first one, these knights of the air against drone jockeys. And if they had played it out that Tom Cruise and his team win, but they win a Pyrrhic victory, because I think, everything's pointing to that it's a drone world that we're going to live in, with nerds in halfway across the world flying drones and flying, but we're not quite there yet. And maybe they need to take a seat for a minute to let the fighter jocks, our heroes, get their one last win in.
Oh God. I saw this in theaters the day it came out.
I was wondering that.
I insisted. I got a posse together. I let all my friends know. I was like, we're going. I rode it on my motorcycle. I wore my white t-shirt and my leather jacket. I was ready. And I cried a lot during this movie. And one of the moments I cried was one of the ways that I love how this movie treated the topic so much. One of the places that had so much compassion was that it carried us all through this letting go that we have to do. Right? Those of us who, and like those of you who are like, I don't know, that are like not these like weird military fanboys, like probably think it's like kind of perverse, this pain of letting go of this like fantasy of like the knights of the air. But you see it a couple times, right? You see it at the very beginning when Ed Harris says, your days, there's going to come a day when you guys are irrelevant. And Tom Cruise says, maybe so, sir, but not today. And when Iceman types out, you have to let go, to Maverick, I just lost it. I lost it. I was silently bawling in the theater because it meant so many things, right? It meant, of course, that Maverick had to let go of trying to protect Rooster, which we're going to have to talk about. But it also meant that he had to let go of Goose, which he hadn't done, which we had to talk about. And so like you have all this compassion for this guy who's like holding on to his like guilt, and his friendship but it's also, I think I took it as, like us old timers having to let go of this past of, like war kind of has ages of heroes that come and go, right? Like World War I, there were no heroes. It was just all awful, right? It was just all like a machine just chewing people up, gears grinding them into meat, right? There were no heroes in World War I. And then, we found a way for heroes to be born again. And, look, there's a lot of propaganda and mythos, and Top Gun was part of that propaganda and mythos. But we fell in love with the fighter jockey and their heroism and their bravery and their courage and their just total badassery. And this movie is the swan song to this whole age, this whole breed of people that we have to say goodbye to. And this is the movie where we, in some ways, say goodbye. Like there aren't going to be 8 Top Guns. There can't be, because that age of drones is coming. And so, yeah, like that Pyrrhic victory scene almost, like there is this kind of desire to have it. And I kind of want it, and maybe I want it like afterward as like a short or something. But yeah, you get this, final celebration of these guys and who they've been, and this acknowledgement that we do have to let go. And it's hard. It's really hard. I think for, guys like you and me that grew up with this symbol of the Air Knight, of this like noble warrior, as part of the quintessential idea of being American and the, the humanitarian, and all the work that these guys did in humanitarian warfare and all the mistakes that we made too. But anyway, I'm getting really emotional here. You can tell, but I do really believe that was a very intentional part of this film.
I think even more so that this was probably made before the Ukraine thing, and, not to get too much into the weeds with Ukraine, but I feel like it must have been the way people felt before World War I, where the beginning of World War I was people on literally horses charging, and they had plumes in their hats and stuff. And then by the end, it's just a meat grinder. And that looks like that's where war is going. And I think that makes it even worse, really, that any of that, that we built up to some degree, that there was some nobility in war. And I guess that, again, that comes and goes in phases, but it sure looks like modern warfare there's not going to be nobility in it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we could debate Ukraine a bit, because there's also there's those, shoot and scoot guys with like the NLAWs and the the Javelin missile launchers, the courageous stand of like early 2022 of these like massively outnumbered and outgunned Ukrainians who didn't let the Russians roll them over. But anyway, but yeah, your point of there's even something very dark about my very emotional mindset here, but I think one of the reasons it's important is it's very common, especially among us older folk, where the American military is more of a symbol. It's not just a symbol of power. It's a symbol of the desire to do what's right. That's been a part of the United States mindset since the Second World War, really. The Second World War is when we decided we're really going to lean into that. The First World War, we kind of, Wilsonian, we kind of teased it, and then we retreated back into being isolationist. And after the Second World War, we said, we're going to make sure that, the Soviet dictatorship concept does not take over the whole world. We're going to beat back fascism. Check. We're going to make sure the Soviets don't take over the whole world. Check. We're going to, we're going to make sure that Slobodan Milosevic doesn't commit genocide to a bunch of Muslims in the Balkans. Check. We're going to make sure that global terrorism doesn't, or do our best to make sure global terrorism doesn't wreck everything. And we're going to make a mess in the meantime. And so there's this sense of doing what we tell ourselves, at least, is the right thing to do, that is very wrapped up in our concept of our international relations and our military. Right. And there's the t-shirt that has upside down Maverick over the MiG that it's just labeled international relations. And so that sense of doing what's right and moral high ground, and these representatives of it, these almost ambassadors of the power part of that, doing what's right, and putting themselves at risk and all this stuff, right? These guys are getting shot at, and you think they get blown up a couple times in this movie. You're right. And it's all in order to stop this, in this movie. It's all in order to stop this, uranium enrichment facility for the what's cool is just like Top Gun 1, it's the mysterious Soviet style, maybe former Soviet satellite state bad guy, right? Let's keep religion out of it. Let's not make it too on point. Right. They actually filmed it in Lake Tahoe. So okay, it looks like maybe Northern Russian kind of, but not really. Maybe it's Kazakhstan, but but it's a fake place, right? It's the Soviet version of Wakanda. And and we're like, we can't let them have nukes. Like that would be bad. It would destabilize the world. It's an unambiguously good thing, right? Like we found one, yay! Right? We found an unambiguously good thing we can do with missiles. That we could blow something up and say, yes, it was a good thing that we blew it up and we made it into a movie. And I'm really glad we picked that because, yeah, we have a lot of movies about moral ambiguity, about how like, oh God, like American Sniper, and you could name 100 of them. And they're all very good, from Black Hawk down forward, right? About like deep moral ambiguity and mistakes and how war changes people and F's them up and causes them to do terrible things that like either transform them into the monsters that they thought they were fighting or they regret it and they get PTSD and they all get all messed up. And that's really important. And I love those movies and I really want to go watch like All Quiet on the Western Front because it's a great anti-war movie, right? Where like people's like faces are getting like, people are drowning in the mud and it's going to be like awful and heart-wrenching, but you have to watch it because war is terrible and inhumane and insane. Right. Anytime there's war, it's insane. And you've got this movie about, sometimes there are people who have to be stopped with force. Right. And I love that you brought up the Ukraine war because it's like, well, Putin just decided he's like, I'm just going to take over Ukraine. And if people weren't willing to use force to stop him, he'd just get away with it. And then who knows what's next? And there was like, and we've seen what happens when people get away with being able to use force to get take what they want. And you've got to draw a line and use explosives and get people killed. And it's awful. And sometimes it's like the beautiful, noble thing to do is to say, we draw the line and we say no, and we fight. And this movie celebrates that instinct. So I am now off my high horse. We could talk more about the film. I'm sorry.
And you see really that we get to enjoy that one last time of a clean battle between there's not civilians getting killed on the ground. It's our very best versus their very best. And that's what it really Top Gun, the first one, was about too, was our very best pilots, like the creme de la creme. I'm sure like other parts of the military would say that they're not, that they're better than the pilots. But I mean, come on, let's be honest that we're giving these people billion-dollar machines and they are the absolute highest trained people you could possibly be. They're scientists, they're acrobats, like everything boiled into one, and they're fighting against people who are the exact same on the opposite side. It's like the battle of champions, like Achilles versus Paris or something.
Oh, great analogy. I was laughing because like your like Navy SEAL and Delta Force listeners are gonna like write you an angry letter. But but otherwise, yeah, it is. You're right. There's something beautiful about it, about the purity of warriors who chose this path, and the best of them squaring off. And also like the technological might and the technological and logistical might of our like our ability to design these things and plan. And although we had the technological, actually, one of the things that's beautiful about this is the technological disadvantage. In Top Gun, in the first Top Gun, you're up against the MiG, which has superior maneuverability and speed versus the F-14 Tomcat. The Tomcat has a lot of survivability. It's built bigger, it has more weaponry, and it has a lot of by design, it has a lot of countermeasures, electronic countermeasures and physical countermeasures built in, better radar, all this stuff. The MiG is just designed to be like too fast to handle. In this case, you've got a third generation fighter against a fifth generation fighter, and you just don't stand a chance. You just forget it, right? You don't stand a chance, and you have a only somewhat implausible way of the greatest fighter pilot ever, or at least the craziest one, dealing with it. And and it's cool. It's very cool. And and so it's like you totally get these like Achilles versus Paris moments, and one of them is like Achilles versus Paris, except like Paris has like a wooden stick, And like, you know, and so he's like, you know, like fending off Achilles with like spear and shield with his wooden stick, and like, the wooden stick just got chopped in half, right? Like, and you've got the F-18 version of that, until like was it Hangman, you know, shoots Achilles in the heel. There you go, done. And in this case, Bear survives. That's where the analogy breaks down. But you mentioned we haven't even gotten to the first line here, though. We've gotten to a lot of stuff. You mentioned the motorcycles, and I want to know why you've got that in our doc. I mean, I literally rode my motorcycle to this movie, so you know how I feel about it. But I want to know what you wanted to cover.
I was talking to a group of teenagers about it, and they were obsessed with the motorcycles, and they almost felt like the motorcycles were characters. And it almost really, when I wanted to kind of like discount that, but the motorcycle really does take on its own character traits, especially when you carry it over from the first movie into the second movie.
I just want to listen. Tell me more.
You got to kind of parse out between the teenage boy's love of motorcycles, but really, like when he's riding that motorcycle around, and it's kind of I think in a way that it is his extension of that's Maverick on land. He can't stop being extreme.
Yeah.
He has to drive a motorcycle. I can't remember the exact. It's a Kawasaki.
It is a Kawasaki. Yeah,
and it can go on, I think, well in excess of 150 miles an hour. And he, even on, when he's commuting, he's got to take everything to its breaking point. Which, in a way, I mean, if you tie it back into the story, that's part of a problem for Maverick, is that he does in every single thing that he does, whether he's flying in a regular F-18, whether he's flying that experimental aircraft, or he's just going to hang out at that fighter jock bar. Everything is to the extreme. And that kind of guy isn't the type of guy who's going to necessarily rise to the ranks in a bureaucracy like the Navy. Steve here again with a quick word from our sponsors.
It's a really great point. Yeah. It's, when he doesn't have a helmet, which it's kind of cool. Like it's kind of 80s cool in the way that like smoking was cool, where you're like, look at this guy killing himself. Right. Like, wow, but, and like, you kind of got to get the shot, but I actually really like that they kept the helmet off him. 'Cause like, the guy does take unnecessary risks. Like, yeah, you're right. It's pathological for him. And so like, to some extent, yeah, every now and then the Navy like seems to find a way to turn his pathological need for danger into something useful. They're like, oh, this maniac, will put him in the Mach 10 jet, right? Because he'll happily do it. And nobody's going to miss him if he blows up, because he's, lonely and single. So that simplifies things significantly. But yeah, he's like, how could you possibly ride a motorcycle without a helmet? Right. When you have any intelligence at all. And so it is a sign of of a pathology in the dude that, of course, right, he brings to bear, because he's so consistent. He's able to bring it to bear. And it's one of the things, it's one of the things that's so well done about the movies. At some point, right, he's a pretty damn good teacher, isn't he? Like in the, when he plays dogfight football, right, when they're like both playing offense and defense at the same time, which I thought was super cool. Probably not something the movie made up, but I thought was very clever. But at some point, like the kids just aren't able to run the gauntlet. Right. And I'm going to do a lot of shorthand here, because I'm assuming you've seen the movie, or that you're going to. Like the kids can't just can't run the gauntlet fast enough. Right. And they're all like, oh, it's too hard. It can't be done. And he's like, you have to do it. Too bad. And then John Hamm shows up. I forget the Admiral's name, but John Hamm shows up and he goes, "You're fired, Maverick." And then he decides, all right, time for like old Maverick, right? Time for me to, and he talks to Penny first. And by the way, we got to talk about Penny, because a bunch of people are like, who's Penny? And I know who Penny is. And if you don't know who Penny is, you'll love finding out. But but then like this is the pivotal moment in the movie, right? When he reaches into himself and he goes, wait a minute, what's my name? It's Maverick, right? It's like at the end of Aladdin when he's like, am I Sultan or am I Sultan, right? Am I Maverick or am I Maverick? I'm going to go literally steal this plane. I'm going to steal an F-18, right? This is a guy who's been humbled, right? Who like, and he like skirted he still skirts the rules. He doesn't buzz towers anymore because he's not an a-hole, right? He's not a self-centered a-hole about it, but he's still willing to break the rules because he's like not ambitious, because he doesn't need to rise through the ranks of the bureaucracy. In fact, he doesn't want to, because by the time you get to colonel, you don't fly anymore. You sit at a desk, and so he just wants to be in the seat. So anyway, so he goes and he steals an F-18 and he runs the gauntlet, right? And he's like, and that love of danger and adrenaline gives him enough oomph to be able to run the gauntlet. And and before he smokes all these kids fighting them 2-on-1, right, in these F-18s, and he's able to humble them. Right. Which again, I think is awesome. Right. And it's just like, it's fun to watch. It's really, really great cinematography because these guys are actually in F-18s. It's a joy to watch. It's a true pleasure. But because he's got this pathological need for danger, he's like sharp. He's super sharp. It just happens to have not killed him yet. And lucky for the United States of America and the Navy that it hasn't killed him yet, because then he's able to run the gauntlet and he's able to show everybody it can be done. And then, of course, he puts, Admiral John Hamm in a very difficult position, in which we have like another funny moment in which he says, man, in which Hamm says, I now have to choose between court-martialing you and putting you in charge of the mission. And Maverick says, sir, may I suggest one of those options? And the major next to him is like, shut up. He was speaking rhetorically. And anyway, and that pivotal part of the movie is like when and this is the part where like I love his character development so much, because he's still got the Maverick, right? It's not that he learned to follow the rules. It's that he stopped thinking about himself and his like petty ego so much.
That leads into, I think, really well into the romance of this movie, because at first I love the fact that his romantic object was Penny Benjamin, who was the Admiral's daughter that they alluded to in the first Top Gun. I thought that was brilliant.
Yep.
And the great Jennifer Connelly, I think she played that role perfectly. She knew she was an Admiral's daughter, so her father was basically a version of Maverick at one point in his life. And she knows this whole military thing inside and out. And she knows exactly who Pete Maverick Mitchell is, because she's known him since she was basically a teenager. And I think that it shows that whole development of Maverick, of really, and looking at it from our modern sensibilities, his first relationship in the first Top Gun was problematic, to say the least.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And then today, and today, where Maverick, is he going to be the cad, or is he going to grow into being a decent human being who can have an adult, mature relationship? Which you can tell, they don't give us all the exposition, but within that time period where he's running around with the Admiral's daughter, Penny Benjamin, to today, they've had a relationship together that didn't work out exactly. It wasn't happily ever after.
Right. Yes, it's something like the fifth time or something like that, she says. But she's very mature, right? It's one of the things that, it's one of the things that's really interesting is she's like exceptionally mature, exceptionally independent, right? She owns the bar, but you can see she's very emotionally independent. Very much owns her role in her life, right? She doesn't like blame Pete for, she doesn't blame him, and she chooses to be part of it. She doesn't see herself as a victim of Pete, in a way that I think a lot of people, when they're with someone who's, just say kind of promiscuous, right, will see themselves as victims of whatever gender, right? They'll see themselves as victims. She chooses not to. She chooses to see herself as as a participant who chooses to, who chooses to be part of this. And so it allows her to meet him where he is. And he's also like, look, she's clearly into bad boys, right? Like he's hot and he's living on the edge and all that stuff. And, so it's like, it's kind of clear that before the movie, like, the Admiral's daughter, right? Like he was probably 22 and she was probably 20 or something. And when they first hooked up and by the way, for those who like don't know the Admiral's daughter scene, basically what happens is when Maverick is getting reamed out for his like long list of things that he's like pissed the Navy off about, the bald admiral from the first movie, who I forget who he is, but he slams his table and he goes, "And one Admiral's daughter," wham. And how do we know it's this person? It's because Goose leans in and he goes, "Penny?" And Maverick goes, "Yeah." Right. And that's all we get about it is Goose going, "Penny?" And so you have to piece it together. But that's how you piece it together. And so that's how we know this person's this person. So she's like, I don't know, she's perfect for him because she has the ability to not get like wrapped up in him. Like she doesn't get wrapped around him the way that, oh my gosh, I forget the instructor's name in the first movie. She gets all wrapped around him. It's super unhealthy, right? It doesn't even matter if she, like, her being the instructor is like only is part of it, like how inappropriate it is, but she gets all wrapped around him. He becomes her entire world. Not good, right? Whereas like she has her own life, her own world. She has her bar she runs. She has her daughter. She has her life. And Pete is someone that she is willing to like negotiate what kind of role she's willing to have him in her life, or how is she willing to have him in her life, and have some healthy boundaries. But also it's the case that like he brings a lot of spontaneity to her life. Like she still wants that clear. She's still attracted to it. And so she's chosen to roll with it. So I don't know. I think their relationship is very cool. And I think she's, she doesn't fix him. That's the other thing that's really cool. She's not like the reason he grows up. But she's mature enough that she leaves space for him to grow up. And she chose to be part of it. It's not that she had to. She chose to be part of this journey for clearly the last 40 years on and off. And it worked out.
She also, it was a scene that I think maybe was a little underplayed because it was fast, but the scene where she takes him out on the sailboat, and it's a mechanical device, but he's not the king in that realm anymore. He's in somebody else's hands, and it's another humbling. I think in the 40 years or so since the first movie is supposed to take place, and in Maverick's career, I think he's been humbled, but in a bad way. He's been kind of ground down. Yeah, where totally. I think he was humbled but brought up.
God, that's so insightful. I love that. Yes. And I guess it's 35 years. It's not 40. So yeah, 35 years. But yeah, you're right. He's been ground down. You can see it, right? He's skittish. He's scared, right? Every now and then that defiance comes out. Like when he's with the Navy, that defiance will come out, but then he gets beat down, right? And he goes, and this like boat moment is when he goes to Penny. He's like, I don't know what to do. Right. I'm out of options. And he was like, he was trying to follow the rules. He was like trying to play by the rules and it didn't work. And he's like, these kids are going to get killed and I can't let it happen. And I just don't have the tools at my disposal. And like, because of my past, I'm not respected by the establishment. And he knows, right, that his past is the reason. And so again, he doesn't feel like a victim. He just feels helpless. And he doesn't know what to do with the system anymore. You're right. He's totally ground down. You could see a lot of, he doesn't have the literal post-traumatic stress disorder response that he did around Goose, but you could see like kind of almost like lowercase t trauma of him, like kind of like freezing up and not be, like the dichotomy between like how he acts when he is at the yoke versus how he acts when he's like in the bureaucracy. It's so different. And Tom Cruise does such an incredible job acting it. Which, I just, again, mad respect to him. But yeah, I do love your point that like Penny empowers him by teaching him, by like reminding him that, I guess by reminding him like he can learn something new, that he doesn't have to, one, he doesn't have to do it alone, but two, that like that he's like powerful, right? That he's smart, and he's powerful, and he's capable. And like he needed to be reminded of that somehow, that he wasn't, just an instructor, I guess. He was a doer as well. And that was part of, I'm still kind of figuring out the exact allegory or the exact metaphor of what the boat meant, what him learning to sail meant. But him learning to sail gave him the idea and or the conviction to say, I'm going to steal an F-18 and show people how it's done, rather than just try to tell them how it's done, in order to save these kids. And I'm okay breaking the rules, and I'm okay facing the consequences. I've faced a lot of consequences, I've faced some pretty bad consequences for a lot of dumb stuff. And I'm going to, I'm going to do what's right. I'm going to cast the die, and I'm going to see what happens. Right. And so he goes into Admiral John Hamm's, I need to get his name. But he goes into Admiral Bo Cyclone Simpson. Okay. Cyclone. He goes into Cyclone's, Cyclone and Warlock are there, and he goes like ready for whatever the ruling is, obviously with a hope, but like he's a little bit more confident that he's done the right thing, and that's cool.
And then we have to talk about another really bumpy road that they give us a lot of exposition on. This is his relationship with Rooster, who I'm sure everybody's hopefully at this point we've laid out. You should see the movie. Rooster is Goose's son, and all the baggage that comes with that.
Yeah. And I was really worried when he was introduced at the bar, and he's got the mustache and the sunglasses, and he's singing Great Balls of Fire. And I was like, no, he can't be Goose 2.0. And he wasn't. And that's great. And it's great. And and so you can see, again, Maverick's like damage about Goose, his inability to let go, big theme for Maverick, right? And the need to like surrender. The need to surrender is a big part of this movie, and the need to stop being in control and let people make their own decisions and let people put themselves at risk, even when you think it's, foolish, right? The same way that you've made that choice, let other people be adults, all that stuff. Big themes of this movie for old man Maverick here. And, he thinks of Rooster as his own son. Rooster certainly doesn't feel the same way, because he thinks like Maverick is kind of why his dad died. And so Maverick pulled his papers from the Naval Academy. So Maverick pulled some strings to make sure that Rooster could not go to the academy, to try to keep him from being a pilot. But Rooster found a way anyway. And Rooster is now behind in his career because of that. And he just hates Maverick for it. And so you have this conflict between the two of them. That's of course very damaging. And they have this like, I think the one scene in the movie I did not like was when they're doing this like stupid corkscrew spiral thing down towards the ground. It was the one thing that I thought was a little cheesy. But yeah, they got to sort it out. And I thought it was a very good, you have to have conflict for a movie. And this Top Gun is a movie about characters. And I thought it was a very worthy, it was a much more worthy story to tell, an even more worthy story to tell than the conflict between Maverick and Iceman. Because it's about, because it's a conflict based on the fact that you have a man who as he matured and as he grew up, he loved this kid's father and mother so much, who died, that and again, he couldn't let them go, that he made mistakes. He made a lot of mistakes, and the biggest one was not letting their son be his own man. And he had to learn to do that in this movie. And give him, and again, like the parallel, or like the hypocrisy of like being such a daredevil himself, but not letting other people take risks is like, it's very realistic. It's not far-fetched at all. And I really enjoy I really enjoyed that struggle that these guys had.
And it pointed towards that really, even after everything that happened in Top Gun 1, Maverick was still essentially a selfish person, and he didn't want himself to get hurt again, or at least that's kind of the way I thought about it. Is he couldn't see Rooster get hurt because that would hurt him too much after what had happened to Goose. Instead of letting Rooster let go, like it was that maybe he felt he was a father to Rooster, but he wasn't the mentor that he wished he had been.
Oh my gosh, you're so right. Yeah, you're right. He was not being maybe he told himself that he was being a father figure to Rooster, but yeah, he wasn't at all. He was just afraid of pain. He was afraid of feeling hurt, and he was selfish and try to protect himself. It's a really great point. And and I don't know much about post-traumatic stress disorder, and I don't know how much it is, if you asked the writing team, if you asked like Jim Cash and Kaczynski and guys like that, like, hey, did you study PTSD and was part of Mitchell's decision to pull Rooster's papers and protect him? Was that a long-term PTSD response? I don't know if they would say, oh yeah, totally. Yeah, we did that research. Or if they would be like, oh no, it's just like, this is just how, we imagine this guy responding, and it's good drama, and it's very understandable and human. But yeah, you're right. It's very selfish of him. I didn't even think about that.
To start winding things down, I think one of the things that I would have much preferred is, even if the movie it came out in 2022, I think I would have liked to have seen it set maybe 15 years ago. I mean, it's really a movie that should have come out 15 years ago, maybe even a little earlier than that. But I would have liked to have seen maybe not Maverick at the end of his career. So much time has elapsed. I think it was just too much time, and it built up too much unbelievability into the narrative. I would have liked to have seen him mid-career, maybe flying in Afghanistan. I wanted to know all of that stuff. I mean, of somebody who's been a fighter pilot for 30 years, I want to learn about that. And I think we could have seen a little bit more of that if it had been set a few years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I immediately have a lot of mixed feelings about what you just said. My immediate feeling is I want more of this. My second thought is trying to do Top Gun during the global war on terror age might have been very difficult, and might have, I think just like navigating, trying to make that in like 2005 to 2008, in the great disillusionment, right, is what I might call that phase of our national development. Maybe not the great, this generation's great disillusionment, because we've had many after World War I, after Vietnam, and during and after the Iraq War, and so what happens? Like, does some do you get like the Wachowski twins to take it and turn it into an allegory of like the fall of the American empire and ruin it, and frankly ruin it forever? Like, does that happen? Because it could have happened. And so what I wonder is like, is what you want possible?
Yeah, that's true. Also, I think you had mentioned it earlier in the conversation. I think it would have cheapened it too, that we get a universe. I think that we get these two snapshots of Maverick in the height of the Cold War. Then we get him at this point in history. If we have 5 Top Guns and we know, he flew missions over Iraq, he did this, he did that, it cheapens the whole thing. And I wonder if that's something to think about with all of these other movies and Marvel universes and everything, that we know too much about it.
I really think so. So much, I'm going to get like really old man on us. But I think you'd agree that like so much of the power of great literature, stuff like, I actually frankly hate Harry Potter. I think it's dumb. But so much of the Harry Potter fan verse is, there were 7 books and it is done, and people get to fill in so much of their own, the imagination fills in so many of the details. Now that is about like the fantasy world. To some extent, I think, what I want is more like, I just want more, air knights, right? The knights of the air. And I think all attempts to try to make a Maverick or a Top Gun knockoff have failed, and that's a bummer. This movie is very special to me and very emotional for me because again, it's a movie all about letting go. And to some extent, the first movie was, but everything about this movie is letting go. It's letting go of fear. It's letting go of needing to be approved of. It's letting go of Goose again. It's letting go of needing to like either protect Rooster or protect yourself from being hurt. It's letting go of letting go of control. It's letting go of the age of the fighter jockey. It's letting go of and it's even letting go of the fantasy of both the fantasy of the United States as like, just like the unequivocal good guy, but also letting go of like I think some of it's also just like letting go of the pain of the disillusionment and accepting. There's a lot about this movie that is like cathartic and getting to acceptance about, hey, things change and it's okay. And there's just like, you see this kind of whole new generation come about, and like Maverick kind of rides off to the sunset. It's beautiful. It's because change is, and especially for those of us who are aging a little bit, right? Like it's something that you can never appreciate in your 20s, no matter how much you try and how much you read. You start to get a little bit older. You start to really appreciate that change is the only constant. And this is a movie about that. And I think like a bunch of Top Guns would be about trying to keep it the same, right? It's like, oh, it's Top Gun. It's like Mad Max is kind of like the same every time. This is a movie about how everything changes, and we have to move on. You have to let go, and it's so hard, but it's so human and so perfect. And I know since we're wrapping up, those of you, my God, if you've not seen it, even if you're, there are going to be a lot of you who are younger listeners who are like, oh, these old guys just being nostalgic. I want to encourage you to also watch this movie because like, holy simoleons, it is the best air combat cinematography in the history of movies ever. Like these guys had a blank check and they went to town with it. And like the vision for it is great. Like, I remember I was like in one of those like lying, those like luxury seats in the theater where like you lie, you lean back. It's a, motorized chair. And I remember when they started their flight into the Lake Tahoe scene in the movie. It's not Lake Tahoe, but that's where they filmed it. And and because of the moisture, you get those cones around the 4 jets as they're over the water. And I remember I like pressed the button to like lean the seat up, and I leaned in and I like crushed. I remember like crushing the hand that I was holding. And I just like was glued to it the whole time. It was riveting. It was absolutely riveting. And that we didn't even talk about that because it takes like, we didn't even talk about that because there's so much of this movie that has like layer upon layer upon layer of beauty. And sublimity or anyway, it is sublime. It's a truly sublime film that is all built within like a badass, action, like fighter plane action movie that is a blast to watch over and over. And so it's worth watching even just for that. The pacing is great. The combat is great. It's fun. It's funny. There's like comedy throughout it. It kind of shifts around. I mean, it's like we could do a part 2 even about the parts that like aren't political and emotional. Maybe we will. I don't know. But man, this movie's good. It's up there, top 5 favorite movies of all time, period.
It lets us believe, and it lets us go back to that point for 2 hours or however long the movie is. And you can, if you go into it and you just check your baggage at the door, and it can get you back into a place of that things are going to be okay.
Yeah, totally. And that they're going to be okay, not because they're going to go back to the way that they used to be. And I think it's like I don't know, man. It's like the first time I've seen really great popular media show that really compellingly, right? Things are going to be okay, not because they're going to revert. We're just going to go forward, and they're going to be okay. We're going to let go of the things that we like held on to so tightly and that we loved so much, and they're going to be okay. And and you can say that all day. But to walk out of a movie feeling that way, walk out of a movie about fighter jockeys feeling that way was quite unexpected. This movie got a layer deeper than the original Top Gun for sure. I tip my hat. I was truly floored walking out. And, when I went to watch it a second time, I wondered, is it really that good? Right. Or was I just like, did it just beat my, was it just that like I was afraid it was going to suck and then it didn't suck? And I watched it again. And it's like, oh, dude, it's really that good. It's really that good. And I'm really grateful. I don't say this about movies. I'm really grateful to the people who put the time and the oomph into getting it right. Because it was a fraught film to make, especially because of the politics. It was the impossible film to make, and they stuck it in a way that I could not have imagined.